6, final, take 1.
This is the inside of a nuclear reactor vessel. It is the heart of an atomic-powered electric plant which generates 60,000 kilowatts of electricity when operating at full capacity. Enough power to meet the requirements of some 30,000 rural families around the clock, 7 days a week. This nuclear plant, while not typical of most power generating stations in operation today, gives us a glimpse into the future of the electric power industry. For in the years ahead, more and more of the nation's total energy demands are going to be met by nuclear power generation. This plant is part of America's consumer-owned Rural Electrification Program, a unique institution born in the Great Depression of the 1930s and now serving about 1/10 of our total population, some 20 million non-urban people with vital electric power. I'm Frank Blair, and this is the story of how the Rural Electrification Program is moving today to meet the challenges of the future. Many people today remember how the Rural Electrification Program began in New Deal days and how rural people themselves, through consumer-owned cooperatives and power districts, overcame the economic odds and established their own electric system. What few people realize, however, is the tremendous impact that rural electrification has on our total economy and how the rural electrics are growing and changing to keep pace with our national growth. This rural electric facility in Mississippi, for example, is being built large enough to take care of the crews and vehicles that will be needed in the years ahead. Co-op manager Hardin Shattuck plans for the future as he builds today. He is typical of rural electrification leaders who view the future as filled with opportunities rather than problems. Let's look at some of these opportunities and challenges and see how they fit into the larger pattern of our national growth. All nations depend upon their rural areas in a number of ways, and ours is certainly no exception. For example, the food produced in rural America feeds us all, and the quantity and quality of our national food supply is directly dependent on the technology of modern agriculture, in which electricity plays a vital role. But these areas, which once were chiefly farmlands, today provide recreation, industrial sites, and living space for increasing numbers of people who cannot find room in the cities. So what happens in rural America is important to us all. And what happens to rural electrification is important to rural America. Near the edges of our cities is where the greatest changes are taking place. This community in Louisiana is similar in a number of ways to hundreds of such areas throughout the nation. A few years ago, this was farmland. Today, many families have moved out beyond the traditional city limits and built homes along the lines of the rural electric system, which has always served the area. With these new families come shops and stores and all the businesses necessary to serve the growing population. All of them must have increasing quantities of electric power, and the rural electric system serving the area must provide it. An electric system must be large enough to take care of its peak demand, though this demand comes only for short periods each day. If the system is not adequate to serve the peak periods, it will break down, and power blackouts will occur. Co-op Superintendent C.B. Richards tells how consumer demand affects his system's operations in Texas.
Actually, our system's activities are pretty much predetermined by the power requirements of the more populated areas that we serve. This is where the power is needed, and this is where we have to deliver it to. When people turn on the switch, they expect the power to be there, and it's our responsibility to see that it is there.
Generating stations owned by commercial power companies, the industry giants which serve the cities, produce much of the power which rural electrics buy and distribute. But rural electrics are not always able to get all the power they need from commercial companies at rates they can afford to pay. The rural electric then has to look elsewhere for its power supply. Sometimes there's a government-owned dam nearby which generates hydroelectric power. If such power is available, the co-op may buy some of it from the government. But obviously there are many areas where there are no such dams. In recent years, electric co-ops, faced with growing power demands and no adequate source of supply, have solved this problem in the way they know best, cooperatively. They have joined together and formed their own power supply systems. Mr. Hollis Dalton, manager of a power supply cooperative in Texas, explains what happens.
In the early days of the Rural Electrification Program in Texas, power was high and the cost of power to distribution systems were almost prohibitive. Therefore, several distribution cooperatives bound together to organize a power supply cooperative in order that they might own and control their source of power. This is the second generating station that this power supply cooperative has constructed. This station has been doubled in size over a period of some 13 years, and we have plans for doubling and tripling the size of the power plant that will be constructed west of this station. There is no end in sight for power requirements in rural areas.
The same thing is happening all over the nation. The rural electrics are still serving essentially the same numbers of people, but people today simply are using more electricity. And this is going to hold true in the years ahead. Growth is the pattern that prevails throughout the entire electric power industry, rural and urban alike, and it's going to continue on into the future. The rural electric systems have been built with the help of loans from the Rural Electrification Administration, an agency of the federal government. These loans are being repaid regularly with interest, on time, and in many cases ahead of time. But the growth capital needs of the rural electrics are becoming so great that capital from the private money market is probably going to be one of the major elements in the future growth of the rural electrification program. Growing capital requirements, however, are only part of the challenge rural electric people are facing. Keeping up with a changing technology also keeps them alert. Electronic data processing, for example, is playing an expanding role in the entire electric power industry, and the rural electrics are taking advantage of this new tool to help them do a better job. Co-op manager D.N. Beasley tells how such equipment is used by his system.
We've had our electronic data processing equipment in use for about 4 years. It has enabled the cooperative to make vast improvements in its operations. It is practically indispensable for making engineering studies and projections. It's a valuable tool in considering rate studies and adjustments, also in power use, and for selective mailings and checking results. Of course, to make full use of such equipment, we have to train staff people constantly in the methods of modern management and how they fit into the data processing system. Such a system can provide answers no better than the data that's put into it. Well-trained engineers, managers, and technicians of all kinds are required to analyze the facts and to program them into the data processing facilities.
Another new development is underground power distribution. By going underground, to an enclosed bank of transformers near a building, Rural Electrics are helping to beautify the areas they serve. Many new schools, homes, and even streetlights are being served underground as Rural Electrics accept this new challenge. Interties with other power systems also will require increasing amounts of the time and attention of the Rural Electrics in the future. Consumers feel the effects of this kind of efficiency where it really counts, in their pocketbooks, as they pay lower electric bills. New industry, finding little room in the cities, is increasingly turning to rural America for plant sites. It might only be a small canning plant, an ice house, or an electric sawmill. But all of these create new demands for power, and the Rural Electric must be ready to meet these new demands. Recreation is becoming a gigantic rural industry in itself. As our national population continues to grow, our limited urban parks and recreation facilities fill up and become overcrowded, unable even to meet today's needs, much less those of tomorrow. Recreation facilities of many kinds require a constant supply of electric power. And again, the Rural Electric is on the job, meeting the needs of its regular consumers and also the needs of the visiting city dweller searching for relaxation. Well, these are some of the things that are going on in the Rural Electrification Program today, and some of the things which are going to be happening in the months and years to come. How the problems are solved and how the solutions are implemented will inevitably affect us all. For the Rural Electrification Program of today and tomorrow is a substantial part of the nation's total electric system, directly serving 20 million rural people with electricity and indirectly providing many of the rest of us with food and recreation and jobs. Rural electric people across the nation are working and building right now so they will be ready for the future, because they know that with power needs doubling every few years, the system which can meet today's needs would be hopelessly inadequate for the demands of the future. These, then, are rural electrification's challenges of the future, and rural electric people are prepared to meet them.